there's no such thing as a change too small.
We create community, we create safe space, we create trust.
We are home and we want to bring many other people home.
There was a problem that needed to be fixed, and the YMCA was part of that solution.
We can all make a change.
First, we need to transform our lives, and then we'll be able to transform other people's lives.
You have to keep trying to build that bridge and keep trying to have that conversation.
At home, but because of this I can't.
Excellent to know. Thank you. Hello.
Morning.
Good morning, everyone.
How are you feeling this morning? Yeah?
Yes. Now it is the time when we have all adjusted to our jet lag, just in time to go back home. Yes? Is anybody going on a trip after this event?
Yeah, raise your hand.
Where are you going? I heard Paris. What did you hear?
I heard Paris, I think.
I heard
yeah.
Paris. That sounds like a fun trip.
Yep.
So everybody, come on in. We can fill up some seats on this side if you wouldn't mind just walking all the way this way.
Here.
Lots of open space here. I am curious to know how many of you all connected with someone from a different culture yesterday. Yes? I definitely did, yeah. Did anyone learn any new words or phrases or discover that there is something that exists in your culture or in your language that doesn't exist in somebody else's? Yeah? Mm-hmm. So in one of our workshops yesterday, we kick off all of our TED Ed workshops with my favorite question to ask to people, which is, what is something small that brings you joy? So what's something small that brings you joy, Tonio?
Meeting with friends.
Meeting with friends. That's a big joy. Let's go smaller.
Okay,
I'm talking like the smell of fresh ground coffee beans in the morning.
In the morning, that brings me joy every morning. Yeah.
You're just going to borrow that joy. Yeah. And one of my colleagues at TED says that her small joy is chapstick. Oh. Raise your hand if you know what chapstick is. Okay. So turns out not everyone has chapstick. In Mexico, do you? What?
No, not really.
No, you don't. No. Do you not have it, or do you call it something different?
It's called different, but I don't think it's as common.
What would you call it?
Let me think about it.
Lip balm?
Yeah, lip balm is probably, yep.
Anyway, one of my favorite activities is to learn what each other's small joys are. I think it's a great way to get to understand people before you learn the big things about them. And I really like learning all of the small things that we have in one home, but not in another. So hopefully we will continue that tradition today, meeting new people, even though we are wrapping up. This is our final morning plenary.
Yep. We are about to finish our event, and this is the last day, and we have a great day ahead of us.
Mm-hmm. So this is the final session of TED Ed Youth Speakers. Have you enjoyed them so far? I'm glad because this is new, so we've not done it before, but I just wanted to let everyone know the way this process worked is at TED, we are all about ideas worth spreading. And like I mentioned, the first evening and have mentioned basically every day since then, we know that ideas exist all over the world and that the people that have ideas worth spreading and able to change the world are you. So we invited young people from YMCAs all over the world to submit a video that would illustrate the issue that they're passionate about. And so far, you've heard a lot of the results of those. We heard issues of climate justice and healthcare. Mental health has been a really big one. And we invited a diverse group of those speakers to develop one single idea with us at TED. So what you've heard here on the stage are young people who have been really working hard to develop that idea and coached by me or by my team. And what you're seeing is the result of that. We want you all to have access to that same curriculum, that same platform, the TED Ed platform. So if you are interested, if you have liked what you've seen today, please visit TED Ed, the TED Ed website, and you can explore our TED Ed Student Talks program, which is a free program available for young people all over the world. Or if you are a Y professional interested in honing those professional skills, you can look up TED Masterclass, which is our, slightly more adultified version of the Student Talks program. So without any further ado, I want to bring up our first speaker of the day, who very kindly agreed to switch places with our initially planned first speaker. One, because that initially planned first speaker was, still on a plane and still en route traveling here. And two, because they happen to be friends from days of yore. This young man is an advocate and champion for youth leadership. He started his own leadership consultancy and does work around the world developing professionalism with young people, but also, with anyone, because as it turns out, the way that we develop leadership skills is the same, no matter how old we are.
That's the way we do it.
That's the way we do it. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming John Lawton.
Hello. My name is John. I'm told that I overthink. I'm told I'm too passionate and I don't know when to rein it in. I make people uncomfortable when I speak the inconvenient truths. But don't expect an apology this morning, because my career is towards a generation of let down youths. The old saying goes in life, our parents want us to have better than they got. But for too many young people, this is a promise forgot. Broken kids will break until we all see them crack. But when you give young people an opportunity, darn, they can speak right back. I was asked to come and speak about some of the work I do, some of the action I try and get going in my community, and some of the successes I've enjoyed as a young activist or a young leader. However, actually, sometimes success is a very poor teacher. I'm going to speak honestly, and it's sometimes our struggles and our failures, our insecurities and our worries that guides our actions, that informs our minds way more than the comfortable bits that we all like to put on our Twitter handles or in our TED Talks or in our CVs. So what I want to do really quickly and really simply is tell you the 3 stories of the 3 young people who changed my life. And perhaps unusually, make a confession to you today. I come from a small village up north called Scotland. Thanks very much. And I come from the glorious capital city of Scotland, Edinburgh. And there's me, is a cute little red-headed baked potato with a "do you smell what the Rock is cooking" hat on, being a WWE wrestling fanatic, pretending that I'm some innocent child who would never dare misbehave to my parents, my teachers, or my youth workers. Yeah, right. Now, my city is kind of seen as a tourist trap destination that's a little bit wealthy, it's a little bit posh, and it's rather sweet. Home of Harry Potter, home of Hollywood Palace or Edinburgh Castle, or the largest multi-arts festival on the planet. But that's not the city that speaks to my heritage. Those aren't the streets that raised me. I've spent so much of my life being ashamed to come from a part of town that's been written off as a project, as an estate, as a public council scheme, where you wouldn't dare go there, where it's easy to mock us all as welfare benefit scroungers who are too lazy to work or were riddled by drugs or crime. And that does stuff to kids growing up. The urban ghettoization starts to really attack the brain of a kid. Now, the reason I tell you about where I'm from is because the first story I want to tell you about comes from those streets. I wasn't a popular kid. I wasn't a confident kid. I would never be the guy on a stage like this today. But I had one friend that I used to hang around with. And one day after school, I'd went down to his house. He lived on the same street as me. And we're sitting in the bedroom, and his mother calls him to go and have some food or one of the various things he was probably doing wrong that day. And I was waiting, and I saw a book on the floor. And I thought, what's this? So me being the polite, non-voyeuristic, non-invasive friend I am, as I thought I'd have a read. And it turned out he kept a diary, a journal. And it really impacted me to the point where I have permission to read you guys a direct extract from this young kid's journal. Now, I almost quote. I've taken out some of the more Scottish poetic words, shall we say. I hate my life. I wish I was dead. This community is horrible, with all the drugs and the police and the crime. Only 2 nights ago, another young boy was stabbed. I hope he's okay. I never see Dad good. The way he is after taking all those drugs is horrible. I wish I had a normal family. I've never seen Mum ever be happy or have a job. She sits at home all day depressed. And we had to go without electricity again all across the weekend. And the dampness in my room is making me ill. When I go to sleep, I don't want to have to wake up. I just feel bloody trapped. No one cares about me. My life will never, ever change. This was a kid in our society, in wealthy United Kingdom, in a capital city, strained with riches and opportunities and tourists and positive stories. Yet for no other reason than context of birth, we have kids who are not even teenagers, who want to end their own lives, who don't want to be here, who are suffering silently. I wasn't academic. I wasn't brave or confident or smart or really aware of my life situation. But it made me ask the most powerful word I've ever found, and that is why. Why is this okay? Why do we let kids suffer? Why is my life expectancy 15 years different from someone 4 bus stops down the road? Why do I not get to go to the good schools or get told that I'm going to be a big successful person? Why am I not believed in by those around me? Why do my family struggle day on day? Why are we defined by the things we don't have rather than the dreams and futures we want to build? And growing up, I realized very quickly, if you aren't around the table, you're going to be on the menu. Young people aren't around the table. Country after country, decade after decade, our rights are on the table. And what do? They smack it on the menu because we're not there to defend ourselves. Young people are the experts on young people. Kids growing up in poverty are the best people to talk about poverty. Gone are the days where we have distant, privileged, compromised people speaking on our behalf. We need to get primary source activism. And so I had to take all the problems and struggles I was going through, and there was many, from mental health to family abuse, poor education outcomes. I was engaged in taking things I shouldn't be taking, hanging around with gangs that I shouldn't have been hanging around with. But there was too much to say, to be quiet. There was too much to do nothing. And so I genuinely believed that we could redefine the paradigms and put young people who are written off, who are at the heart of problems with crime and drugs and police, at the heart of being the answer. I believe in generational justice. And I don't know any international development question, any SDG, any UN agenda, any global gathering, whether it's economic justice, employment rights, climate change, where young people are not the most obvious, sustainable, energetic solution. Yet we're still told that children should be seen and not heard. We speak when we're spoken to. We respect our elders. Well, maybe it's time for us to all realize when we respect and listen to young people, the power of what we can unlock as a coalition of generations working together. I hated myself for so long. I was ashamed of where I was from. I tried to reverse snobbery myself to try and pretend that I was more comfortable or capable or come from a better family. It's taken me a long time to get strength from my vulnerabilities because there's a drought of authenticity out there. So I set up the first ever youth forum my area had. It wasn't cool, it wasn't easy, it wasn't welcome, but I didn't care. I wanted to change the world. I had to dare to lead even when no one else believed in me. When I was taking my antidepressant pills, when I was getting in trouble with the local police, when I was getting kicked out of home and having to move in with other relatives, when I didn't want to live anymore. And sometimes as activists, we create our own culture of privilege. We get very wealthy, articulate people who have had a lot of opportunity and privilege to get up here and make speeches, and sometimes it made people like me feel even less capable. And those were the guys on our side. The second story I want to tell you is I then got involved in the local youth parliament, and they sent me on an exchange program with Malawi. I don't know if I've got anyone from Malawi in today, but they sent me over. And I'm going to speak really honestly, and it shames me to say this. I thought I was just some poor white guy going to help all those black people from the patronizing charity adverts that I watch on TV. And I was going to give them something. I gained more than I could ever dream to give on that trip. And when I was there, I met a young man called Frederick. Now, Frederick was like me. He was a bit awkward and shy and didn't really want to jump in and speak immediately. So we kind of hung back and we started chatting in a corner. And as if he told me what he had for his breakfast or what football team he supports or what time it is, I remember him telling me that both his parents were taken at the hands of HIV/AIDS. Like millions of kids suffer with every year, and preventably so, based on the economic decisions we still allow to be made globally. Now, I thought I was radical, redefine the paradigms, young people first, break convention, start again, viva la revolution, young people first, etc. Don't call me the future, because I'm very much here today. Everything was possible. But then he said to me, brother, don't feel sorry for me, because I have a plan, I have a goal. I want to one day run an orphanage for other kids like me. And I instantly thought, oh, that's cute, but what chance do you have? Look at the state of your life. You're in, I think it was something like the 10th poorest country in the world at the time. You have no family, no compulsory secondary school. Where are you going to go with this? You might have a nice chat, but you don't have any tools. And he gave me a stare like no one's ever looked at me. And he was like, oh, you think so? He says, well, brother, I've been running an orphanage for a few months. We've got 20-odd young people, and we give them breakfast, we give them books, and I hug them and tell them I love them. Even then, he realized the power of a positive adult relationship to inspire a young kid's heart. And I found myself going, how did you do this, brother? Where did you get the diversified fundraising strategy? Who booked you for your first TEDx? Where did you get your board of directors or your public insurance policy or your advocacy strategy? Things we all think about. And he gave me the look again. And he said, brother, the solution wasn't easy, but it was simple. And this sentence changed my life. He said, the world thinks in black and white. I decided to dream in full color. Wow. Yeah. Now, you're clapping, and that's lovely, but I'm from Scotland, so I have cynicism and sarcasm in my DNA. So I'm like, I've never heard sarcasm get a whoop, but there we go. I found myself going, well, I dream too, bro, but I'm asleep. I don't know what color it is. But you know what? See when someone's in front of you and his eyes were big and white and bright and he's staring into your soul and you just realize it's nothing to do with that. It's all to do with this. I got it. I felt it. I'd been defined by everything that made me inferior or insecure or judged or marginalized my whole life. Yet this kid had every reason to hate his God, question life, becoming under patronizing charitable advertisement for someone like me to scorn at. Yet he had the audacity to change other people's lives. If you change your attitude, we can change our lives. So I got back to Scotland. And I'm going to be honest, I got severely bullied physically day after day. When you're the large redhead kid, you become a target in a playground and beaten up. I was poor. We accessed free food. We had to get food banks, the most basic benefits. We were mocked and slagged as the poverty kids. Was in a really ghettoized community. If you've ever seen the movie Trainspotting, that is actually where I'm from. When you watch people falling off balconies and it goes, childhood, it says a lot about the paradigms and how we raise children. I was surrounded by drugs every day and engaged with drugs, and it was dragging me down a path I shouldn't be going down. We went to the single worst performing school in my city. I was severely overweight and massively insecure because we forget that body image problems also is for men. I was in denial of my sexuality. I couldn't come out and be honest, so I was dealing with a whole emotional, psychological noose the whole time I was existing. Where I'm from, it's pretty rough. You jump about in a gang. You don't wake up and go, knock, 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 good morning. Doesn't work like that. Before you know it, I'll be wearing flamboyant shirts. When life gives you lemons, wear them. And the list goes on and on and on. You get the idea. But I had to choose to change. And there'll be people right now who don't feel good enough. You don't feel beautiful enough or smart enough or loud enough or heard enough or experienced enough or rich enough or connected enough. And my message to that is absolute nonsense. You are as connected and smart and capable as your mind will let you believe you are. Because we grow up in a life where people are kept down so obviously by society that it takes people to break free and claim their voices. Because it's better to fail trying than failing to ever try. It's the people with the least who I often find have the most to give, who have the most direct experience to share. Whether you're growing up in care, whether you're dealing with being an orphan, whether you're dealing with coming out as a beautiful trans member of our community, whether you're representing your religion and faith, it doesn't matter. The only walls you cannot scale are the ones you put up for yourself. And I say this very, very openly. I've never met a problem where a wall has been the answer. So I got back to Scotland, and I was never going to apologise for not having a relationship with my father or growing up with mental health or in poverty. And I went back, and I went to a youth parliament meeting, and I'd run for a candidacy, and I failed so badly, and everyone laughed at me, and I felt so insecure. But I went back the next year, and I stood for chairman of that organisation, and was democratically elected at the time as one of the youngest ever chairs that organisation had ever had, because the scars on my heart have become the words in my speech. The challenges in my memories have become the lines on my CV. From campaigning for votes at 16, to ending gender bias, to promoting the LGBT community, to giving a voice to my African brothers and sisters back in Malawi, and we keep this partnership going to this day, to giving lectures in universities. I attempted university, but I realised that my bursary wasn't an alcohol voucher, and I dropped out after 1 year. And I was never going to shut up. Never shut up. And this little kid from a working class community in North Edinburgh went and gave a speech to 12,000 kids, spoke at the UN General Assembly, gave a speech to the Commonwealth heads of government, lectures at Sydney Business School and George Washington University. He's been lucky or unlucky enough, depending on which photograph you're looking at, to meet and work with some of the world's most influential people. I remember the time I met Goodluck Jonathan and Jacob Zuma, and the guy went, "It's so nice to meet you, my Irish brother." Almost got the other one. And I've never apologised for speaking out, for speaking proud and loud, because no matter what the struggle, I've never found that inaction is the answer. The third story I want to tell you about is my friend Tawfiq. Tawfiq Ben Saud from Libya, and he's an amazing young changemaker who believed in the power of democracy and giving young people a vote and having young people empowered. And he had a message against terrorism in his country. And he believed that you're powerful and you can make change. You just need to take the opportunity and act. And that captured my heart. Unfortunately, he had his life taken at traffic lights in his car by terrorists. When young people who believe in democracy are a threat to the evils in our world, we know we need to get louder, prouder, work together and speak out. And that third story of the kid who changed my life, he's one of the few people that I genuinely believe deserves the word hero. Because he wasn't acting big, he was acting honest, he was acting local. And all of that has made me realize empowerment, guys, whatever your struggle or reality, it cannot, in my view, be given. It must be taken. Please disrupt to comply, not just comply to disrupt. And I'm going to finish with my 3 ABCs, which triggers my brain every time I come out and speak. ABC, always be. ABC, always be. Need to be louder. This is my favorite one. And ABC, always be. Head proud, heart strong, voice loud. That's the cocktail for modern activism as a group and generation of young people. And I promised you a confession. The boy in that diary was me. And the difference between trying to end my own life at 12 years old and having the audacity to stand in front of a room of thousands of people in a big area like this was mindset, was purpose, was passion. And if you believe in that definition of leadership being about heart and spirit and purpose and mindset, what is beautiful and energetic and arousing and energizing and spicy and delicious about that definition is we can all choose to do it wherever we are from. Because it's the people that we don't imagine anything of that do the things that no one else can imagine. Thank you very much, YMCA, one more time. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan.
Just a little quiet, low-key message for your morning.
Yeah.
With a quiet wardrobe to match.
I love that quote that says, young people are the only truly sustainable solution.
Sustainability is a big theme in this conference, and it's an element of youth leadership that we don't talk about as much, but it's so true. There is a more sustainable solution when you focus on youth leadership.
Absolutely, and I think our TED speakers are a good proof of that. So to continue with our series, I am actually very pleased to introduce a good friend of mine that I happened to meet last year in Mexico City. She has been leading some great community engagement in the provincial area of British Columbia. She is a member of the staff team of the Greater Vancouver YMCA. She's also been leading some great work on reconciliation with Indigenous community on behalf of the YMCA. So please join me in welcoming Lindsey Martin from the YMCA of Greater Vancouver.
Growing up, I thought I was as Canadian as you could get. I was born and raised in Vancouver, Canada, and have pretty much spent my whole life there. Both of my parents were born in Vancouver, and their parents were also born in Canada. But really, both sides of my family originated from different areas in Europe. And it wasn't until the start of an event at my university that I first heard Vancouver referred to as the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. This is an acknowledgement of the people who have lived on the land that is now called Vancouver since time immemorial. It is also a recognition that this land was never surrendered or given up willingly to colonizers. And it was in that moment that I started to question what I knew to be the history of Canada and my identity as a Canadian. In school, I learned about the history of many places around the world, places in Africa, places in Asia, places in Europe. And I learned about the history of Canada just as I learned about the other places in the world, told through the eyes of the victor, which, within the context of Canadian history, was also the oppressor. And two things stand out to me when I reflect back on learning about the Indigenous people of Canada. One, I understood it as ancient history about a group of people that no longer existed. And two, my understanding of our history was that the arrival and establishment of settlers in Canada was built on reciprocity, friendship, and trust with the Indigenous people of the area. It wasn't until years later I learned I was very wrong. I myself am not Indigenous to Canada. I'm a white woman of European descent whose ancestors were the colonizers. I'm not here to speak on behalf of anyone or any group of people. It is not my intention to tell a story that is not mine to share or to paint a picture that is not true for all. So why am I here? What am I doing on this stage talking about something that did not happen to me? Should I be up here talking about this? These are all the questions I've been reflecting on as I've been preparing this talk and really on a daily basis at home. I'm here to share my journey and experiences as I try and learn a difficult truth about the history of Canada. A history that is still unknown to many, and a history that is still unfolding today. And through this ongoing learning, I hope to learn where I fit in it all. And maybe you've done the same in your part of the world. So how do we stand up as advocates and allies and do our part in building communities where everyone's rights are respected, where everyone can thrive, and where everyone can live as they choose? Many countries around the world have been colonized throughout history, the impacts of which are still felt to varying degrees. Canada's colonial past is recent, and I've learned that there are still harmful government policies in place that continue to be an invasive force on many Indigenous people in Canada. I learned that the impacts of colonization and the intergenerational trauma that has been inflicted on Indigenous people in Canada has transcended generations and continues today. What stands out to me the most is that the cultural genocide that has taken place since the arrival of settlers largely stemmed from the creation of residential schools. Schools run by the government and Catholic Church that took children from their homes and placed them in schools where they had no contact with their families. They were not allowed to speak their language. Many children experienced physical and sexual abuse at these schools. The impacts of this trauma has carried through generations, and studies have now shown the ripple effect of intergenerational trauma. This means that children today continue to feel the trauma that their parents and grandparents experienced in residential schools. It all of a sudden felt to me like we weren't being real or honest about our history. It felt like we should be acknowledging and recognizing our shared past to learn from it and move forward together. It also felt like we should be taking more time to recognize, celebrate, and learn from the resilience and the strength demonstrated by so many Indigenous people in Canada, and the many languages, cultures, teachings, traditions, and stories that have remained strong. But I didn't know how, and I didn't know what the right first step was. My journey to find an answer to these questions really began about 2 years ago when I attended a national youth conference. And at the start of the event, we were split up into working groups of about 10 people, and we spent the entire week with only those 10 people. Our group was focused on discussing pathways to reconciliation. We were a group of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous young leaders from across Canada, and we became instant friends. We spent most of the week sharing stories of our lives and the communities we grew up in. And my world was flipped completely upside down when I learned about the many challenging life circumstances many people found themselves in due to the intergenerational trauma caused by colonization and the ongoing inequities that exist today due to the systems and structures in place. It was astonishing to me how ignorant and unaware I had been to what the extremes of life in Canada could look like for so many, and how unaware everyone I had been surrounded by my entire life was. Things like access to clean drinking water, health services, and education are just a few examples of services not readily accessible to some communities of my new friends. It was a challenging journey of listening and learning and unlearning a lot of what I knew to be true. And it took me hearing firsthand someone's lived experience. When I got home from the conference, I was flooded with different emotions. I felt sad that this was happening. I felt guilty for not knowing and for who I was. And then I felt angry for feeling guilty because that wasn't doing anyone any good. And then I felt even angrier at everyone and at myself for being so blissfully unaware. I think it was in that reflection that I also realized that we can't expect others to relive their traumas in order for people to understand or to care. Vulnerability and trust are built, not given. I think we all need to take responsibility for educating ourselves on what has happened and what is happening in our communities, not only within Canada, but around the world, because we are all neighbors. A few months after the conference, after a lot of reflecting with some friends and after asking a lot of questions to many mentors and community leaders in reconciliation, we secured some funding from our local YMCA, and we hosted a 4-day gathering open to young leaders in Canada that encouraged diverse participation of people from different areas and different backgrounds. And the goal of the gathering was to intentionally hold space for people to build relationships and to learn from one another with a focus on reconciliation. And the group had a really hard time coming up with one definition for reconciliation because everyone felt it was such an individual process and looked different to everyone. One commonality, however, is that everyone thought that it starts with and is centered on relationships. A quote by Dr. Chief Robert Joseph, a hereditary chief of the Gwaweyanook First Nation, who has devoted his life to bridging the differences brought about by intolerance, lack of understanding, and racism, both in Canada and abroad, summarizes this learning well. We must recognize our common humanity and permanent connection to one another. Our collective well-being rests in the relationships we build today. The largest component of the gathering was that everyone had to come with something that they wanted to teach the group, whether it was a topic of discussion, a workshop, a song, a game, a dance, anything. And it was incredible getting to witness the power of reciprocal knowledge exchange. It opened my eyes to the importance of listening, not to respond or to judge or to disagree, but to really understand what someone is saying and where they're coming from. Every single person around you has a lifetime of experiences and wisdom that we can all learn from. So I left those 4 days knowing that I did have a role to play in reconciliation, and not only a role, but a responsibility. But I was still struggling with what that looked like. Throughout this whole journey of learning, I've kept coming back to contemplating what my role in reconciliation is, while recognizing the privilege that I've experienced as a white woman. How do I support without causing more harm or taking up too much space? I kept coming back to those questions I mentioned earlier. Who am I to be talking about this? But is staying silent while so much damage still being done even worse? I'm still learning what my role in reconciliation is, but throughout this journey, I think I've come to one conclusion. Reconciliation is a collective effort. We are all responsible and have a role to play. And I think this translates to everyone, everywhere, within all contexts. We are all responsible and have a role to play in the collective well-being of our local communities and global community. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Out of curiosity, how many of you, just give me some snaps if your answer to this is yes, how many of you have found yourself in a position of not knowing whether or not you belong in the conversation you're having or in the place where you are? So I really love the honest way that Lindsay is exploring this question, and you heard John mention it as well. Who am I to try and go into this place and solve this problem? It makes me remember, though, the beginning of this session where we saw a flag ceremony that included a pride flag, flags of indigenous peoples from several nations, and a flag that represents refugees and displaced persons. Here at the YMCA, this community which we have built, is a home for everyone. What that means is if you're not sure about your role in a particular conversation, you can turn around to somebody in this community and ask, and then you can listen to what they have to say. So I want to thank Lindsay and John for the really honest explorations of these questions, and hope that you all can take that back to your whys. And to explore a little bit more about this idea of home, we have a video.
I was refugee in Pakistan, I was refugee in Iran, I was refugee in Dubai, and now I'm a refugee in France.
Les gens, quand tu es handicapé, ils n'essaient même pas de voir ce que tu es capable de faire, mais ils te jugent à travers ton handicap.
Haberme venido no fue una buena idea.
यहाँ की लड़कियाँ कुछ नहीं कर सकती।
लाइट रहित अनि उजियार रहित हाम्रो बाल बच्चा उजियार रहे.
Agama me fumidam bem e só na me bem muskel na me khorta.
Porque se todo mundo tivesse alimento em casa, ela podia raciocinar. Então, poderia ser pobre, mas teria inteligência na cabeça para poder sair dali.
Parce que na mukil mutu azwana mission na onzamba tindelai. Ngape na za mukil pona mission na ngai me nzambe ndaebi.
I've left my husband to be with a woman, and for me that's a huge step in my country as an African woman to do that. I do have a strong voice and I'm strong as a woman speaking for myself.
Nous devons dire au monde que nous existons, que vous êtes là. Et je suis sûr qu'aucune misère, aucune pauvreté extrême n'est pas une fatalité. On peut la combattre.
Mba afaka ihany fa mba tsy hitovy amin'le hoe toerana nisy atsony zany fa mba lasa ambonimbony kokoa zany izy dia tamikoa ny reniny dia famihina teo zany any Termiana.
Good one. In the spirit of leaving no one behind, our next speaker is the Executive Director and CEO of the Sioux YMCA in the United States, which is the only YMCA on a Native American reservation in my home country. And Andrew spends a lot of his time traveling around trying to let people know that this community exists and trying to gain some support, doing everything from running marathons in Mexico soon, right?
So, very soon, this December. Yeah, you want to support them. They will be running in Cancun in December this year.
So cool. I mean, I'm glad it's him and not me doing the running. But it's incredible work. And in rehearsing, Andrew and I talked a lot about what it means for us as Y workers when we are constantly trying to fill others' cups, which is a metaphor that he'll discuss in just a little bit. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Andrew Corley.
I stand in front of you as the CEO of the Sioux YMCA, but I'm also a change agent, a millennial, a superhero. Like me, the YMCA is so many things. We are a chart-topping pop song from back in the day. We are a global alliance present with 120 movements. We are the center of our communities, of our countries, around the world. Whether you're on the shores of Lomé teaching young women how to be entrepreneurs, building a beautiful camp in Kosovo for war-impacted communities, or a life coach in Minneapolis working with foster youth through some of their hardest times, we all have the same cornerstone. We're all here to do one job, to change the world. Changing the world isn't this big, drastic dream. It's as simple as being there for that one person. We're here to make a brighter future, focusing on spirit, body, and mind. We are a life-saving global entity. We are the closest thing this world's going to get to the Avengers, but we have a much larger team. We're the center of our communities, the heroes in our communities, unafraid to take on any challenge. We do our superhero jobs with whatever resources we have, forming the triangle of spirit, body, and mind. I want you to take a moment. Picture what someone looks like who has a healthy spirit. Do you see a priest, a rabbi, a shaman? What does someone look like when they don't have an unhealthy spirit, when they have an unhealthy spirit? They can pray, they can reflect, they can meditate, they can go to mass. Now I want you to picture someone who has a healthy body. Is it a bodybuilder, a marathon runner, a gymnast? If someone's unfit, they can swim, run, go to Zumba. Now, what does it look like to have a healthy mind? Who do you see? The person to your left and to your right, you can't tell if they're struggling with mental health or if they're doing fine, and it fluctuates day by day. In recent years in the United States, there's been a big push for work-life balance. Often we use the metaphor of making sure your glass is full before you take on another challenge. In order to have a healthy work-life balance, you're going to have to pour some of your cup into others, but you have to make sure you're taking care of yourself. If you're not taking care of yourself, how are you going to make an impact for those around you, bringing them to their potential? A superhero, like one of the Avengers, like one of you, will do whatever they can to fill the people's glasses around them, sometimes before looking at what you have in your glass. This is a lesson I learned when I worked on my first week working for the YMCA all those years ago. And this week changed my life forever. Just as Peter Parker got bit by a radioactive spider and became Spider-Man, I got hit with a radioactive paddle to become my own superhero. I don't know what that says about my superpower. But instead of a spider, he was a teen. And instead of him biting me, he was the most challenging camper I ever had. The Y camp I was working at was in Massachusetts. We had 2 weeks of staff training where we learned some basic rules like don't have favorite campers, but dove deep into challenging behaviors and seeing the extreme behaviors that we have through scenarios and role-playing. The training ended and it was check-in day for the first week. Me and my co-counselor were beyond excited. The campers started rolling in, the first 5 were there, they were playing and having a great time. We thought this is going to be an amazing session. Then Dean walked in, and you could just feel it. He walked up to his bunk, took his name tag, and ripped it off because he didn't like the lion drawing that was on it. My co and I looked at each other. This is going to be a real treat. Dean had the special ability to exemplify and embody all of those negative behavioral challenges into one camper, making him the ideal camper from hell. Dean's behavior was so intense, his actions required constant attention. We actually had to call in another camp counselor, so while the 2 counselors were able to manage the cabin and the day-to-day activities, I got the pleasure of working with Dean one-on-one. As the weeks went on, I got insulted, berated, mocked, teased. The final straw was when he threw a paddle at my head while we were in the canoe. I lost it. After all, a person can only take so much torture. Dean seemed healthy on the outside. He was energetic, physically fit. He even prayed before bed. When we got to shore, I sat down with him and had a stern talking, borderline yelling moment with him. Dean's head was down, face in his hands. And he looks up and he's bawling. I thought, why is he crying? I have a concussion. I talked with Dean for 2 hours that day. He was afraid that he had pushed me too far and that I was going to abandon him like every other adult has abandoned Dean throughout his whole entire life. Started peeling back the layers. What was his mental health status? Spiritually, physically, he was fine. But mentally, where was he? We peel back the layers, he opens up. He dives into the neglect, the self-harm, the domestic violence he's been witnessed and a part of, and the sexual exploitation he's endured his entire life at 13. It was all so clear. Our jobs at the YMCA love titles. You might be camp counselor or program director, but all that title means is you're in a position to do great things with those individuals, to change their world. When we address mental health, we have a chance to transform those lives. When the extreme situation of not having a plan to support the mental health of our youth is suicide, we need to get to work. So focusing on Dean, I only had a week left with him. I needed to do my superhero job. I needed to change his world. I poured all my resources into him. My time, my money, my compassion, my resources that I had at my disposal, which wasn't much at 17. Dean and I stayed connected over the years. And just like Dean broke all our rules, I had to break one, and he became my favorite camper. So I know, being the superheroes that you all are, you pour from your glass to fill up around you. That's your superpower. And with great power comes great responsibility. But your glasses can only refill at a trickle, and Dean's glass is getting harder and harder to fill. And what you do when you've been spending years connecting with Dean, working with him through all of these issues, filling his glass as much as I can, and one day, it gets smashed. Many of us here have likely experienced losing a youth to suicide. So what do you do when you have all those feelings of hatred and loneliness and despair, and it's building up in a rush of hurt, and you can't breathe, and you don't know what to do, and you hear the news, and you're choking on the sense of failure, not feeling like a hero, but more like a villain, because hero saves lives, and you lost that life. And you have nothing but loss. What do you do when you're at Dean's funeral, holding back tears to put the facade of being strong, to being that superhero? But then you start hearing his friends and family talk. During his eulogy, they're talking about the lessons that Dean passed on to them. And then you realize that this whole time, Dean has been taking from his glass and pouring it to all the people around him. He's been filling their glass. That slow trickle that was coming through Dean's cracks and the big splash from when he finally broke it, all overflowed to his family's glasses, to his whole world. It even flowed back into mine. But the lesson flowed from me to him to them. That the world I had changed for Dean had changed the world for his entire world. All the people he had ever touched were changed by him. That as much as I poured in him, it wasn't wasted. In fact, all of that I poured into Dean was amplified because he was able to affect his whole world. My money, time, effort, resources all benefited Dean's entire world. There was nothing I could have done to save him. And as good of a superhero as I want to be, the hardest fact you have to know is you can't save everyone. His short life wasn't a failure. It was a lesson. That even though suicide ended his life, and I couldn't stop it, I was able to make his life better. I was able to give him a better world. And I found out that Dean changed my world. I had to lean into that change because it was so important for him to change my world, and it needed to stick with me forever. So I decided to figure out how I can make the biggest impact and change as many lives as possible. I eventually left the Y in Boston and moved all the way out to South Dakota. At the age of 23, I became one of the youngest CEOs in the YMCA movement. Although every Y is unique, the Sioux Y is definitely the most interesting. Come out and visit, we'll show you. We're located in the middle of the US, the only YMCA on a Native American reservation. Because of this, we got great opportunities, but we also got some great barriers. Our community members are faced with the highest child poverty levels in all of North America, where there's suicide attempts on a daily basis, where it's a third world nation in the heart of America. Our camp staff act more like social workers than programmers because they have to, because they're the superheroes in our community. Dean's influence has created an intentional focus, and with me being able to change so many lives, and for me being in the CEO position, the next 3 years we're going to be focusing on making sure all of our programs have trauma-informed care curriculums. All of our staff, all of our volunteers program in board members will go through mental health first aid trainings. We will make sure that this doesn't happen again. Changing the world is lofty. But what if I told you changing the world is as easy as being there for Dean? Being a shoulder to cry on. The role model for that one individual. The one safe adult he ever felt connected to. That yes, there's 7 billion people on this planet, but each has their own unique world. So that's 7 billion worlds we can change. So like I was able to change the world for Dean, you can change the world for that one person, and then the next one, and the next one. And they'll change the world for that one person, and it'll spiderweb across the whole planet. That leaders in your community, we can all agree that we cannot and we will not let mental health continue to be overlooked and forgotten. That this is the reason we wake up in the morning. We clock in, we put our superhero cape on, we do our best jobs to change the world. But most importantly, I need you all to be the change. Thank you.
Wow, wasn't it? And again, if you want to support them, follow Andy and the CUY on social media. They will be running for this great cause of the YMCA on December of this year. Our next speaker is a 20-year-old rising junior at Yale University. He is an unapologetic American Muslim Bangladeshi student activist, entrepreneur, and speaker. He is the CEO and co-founder of JUV Consulting, which is a marketing consultancy that works with clients to help them reach young people. He is also the founder of Redefine, which is a youth-run, non-for-profit committed to furthering equality, and is also a global youth advisor for Viacom's Generation Change. Please join me in welcoming Ziad.
Hi, hi, hi. So when you think about Generation Z, what comes to mind? For me, as a Generation Zer, what comes to mind is memes and movements. And what I mean by that is that we are a generation of many things, and it's two sides of the same coin. We give young folks a hard time for spending too much time on our phones, but we're silent and don't critique our parents for taking selfies on their iPads. We like to pretend that we're just wasting our time, frivolously using our devices and not thinking critically about what that means or what that looks like. But the fact that we're creating these memes, creating these GIFs or GIFs, whatever you want to call them, has fundamentally reshaped how society operates, how political schema operate. Now, when the world happens, when chaos happens, we are synthesizing the political moments that we're living in through these memes, through these GIFs, right? So the fact that we're spending as much time on Instagram as we are means that our disruption gets to be mainstream. That when we critique, when we say things shouldn't be the way that they are, that gets to make headlines. And too often we tell young people, choose one thing or another. Right now, in this moment, you can only be a student. You can only be this, or you can be that our time must be later. No, our time is now, and it must be now. Thank you. And I mean that, right? Because the world's problems, what's happening right now, affects us deeply as a generation that's the most diverse ever. And a generation that is dubbed the plurals. And why are we dubbed the plurals? It's because we're thought to be the first generation that thinks in terms of we. And what that means is we're connected to thousands of people around the world, like this room, like the thousands of people that we're connected to online. So when we go to the polls, and you better believe that we go to the polls, we're not just thinking about the people who live on our streets, we're thinking about the thousands of people we're connected to online. We're reshaping how we think, and we're thinking in terms of we. And we're claiming that and saying, we don't have to choose one thing or another. We get to be all things. Why would you have a cake if you didn't get to eat it too? And I think that young people always have critiqued and said, we're going to ask hard questions and say, just because things have been this way doesn't mean they have to stay this way. But what's unique about the moment that we're living in is the digital tools that we have access to allow those disruptions to be mainstream. And for me, that's made a world of difference. I want to center any conversation I have in my privilege. And so I was uniquely privileged to do the work and to do the work that I feel so lucky to do. I'm from Princeton, New Jersey. I'm American Muslim. I'm unapologetic, and I'm damn proud to be me. Thanks. And I started a nonprofit right when I was at the end of 8th grade called Redefy. And we're a by teens for teens social justice advocacy group. I'm no longer a teenager. I'm 20. I'm getting old. I feel it. But I founded Redefy, when I was 13, 14 years old, because I looked around my school hallways, as I'm sure many of you have. And I saw people being othered, people being made to feel different. And I realized how often we're told to be something that we're not because of how we identify or who we are or how the world sees us, instead of just having the agency and space to be who we are and to claim that proudly. And I saw that as boys sat at one table and girls sat at another table, and all the boys' table wanted to talk about was girls and sports, and I wasn't with it. And so I found a new table because that's what Gen Z is about. It's not about fighting for a seat at the table. Millennials did that for us. It's about saying if the table is not for us, we're going to build our own or we're going to flip the damn thing. And so I looked at my lunchroom and I said, where do I belong? Where's my seat? And I think a lot of people are looking around their lunchroom and saying, where are the kids who look and feel like me? And you might fall into superficial categories and be like, I'm probably in that artsy crowd, or maybe I should change myself to be in this jock crowd, or whatever it might be. And it's not as cookie cutter as it was in the 70s movies, but it still exists, in new and different ways. But I think that more of us are saying, no, we get to make our own tables. We don't have to play by the same rules. And so I saw this happening, when I was in middle school, and I said, it's only going to get worse in high school. People are just going to get meaner, and it's not always happening out of malice, it's happening out of ignorance. People don't know how to treat people with different lived experiences. People don't know better, because people don't know our stories, because we don't talk about them enough. We ask so often, how are you, and just expect a good. We need to be asking more, who are yous? And so what I did was I created Redefy to tell those who are yous, to share our stories, to connect, because it's so hard to hate somebody you know. And through that, found myself in rooms that I never imagined, found myself eating dinner with President Obama at 16, found myself meeting with politicians, being in rooms like this that I didn't know existed. And I realized how often young people are talked about, but not talked to. And even when we are talked to, it's as the intern in the corner, or it's as an afterthought or a validation. How often do the same people that claim to championing young people's voices only use this as a prop rather than a partner? How often are we treated as guinea pigs rather than partners? As young people, so often there are literally youth experts who are talking about us instead of ourselves talking for ourselves. And I saw that, as a young activist, as a young nonprofit founder, being in these spaces. And so my junior year of high school, I founded Juve Consulting, a Generation Z consulting firm that is disrupting this marketplace by saying, no, don't talk about us, talk to us. And if anyone's going to be profiting off of our narrative, it should be us, and you'll profit more because of it, because no one knows us better than ourselves. My work fundamentally comes from a place of no group of people should ever be talked about without that group of people present and centered in the conversation, full stop, period. And I mean that when I critique an all-male panel deciding how to police women's bodies. I mean that when I'm talking about the fact that there are ethnic studies departments who are headed by people who don't belong to those ethnicities and don't know those histories. And I mean that when young people are constantly silenced in conversations about young people. And so I sought to disrupt that, and we've had a lot of success doing so. I had no idea what the heck I was doing when I started. Now, we made Forbes 30 under 30 at 19. We have full-time offices in Times Square. We've done the whole thing this last year, right? And we're doing it. And we're being heard, and people are listening because our voices matter right now. Not tomorrow, but right now. And so when I think about what advice to impart, I'm not here to preach. I'm not. I'm here to have a conversation. I'm here to say that so often we're told to choose one or the other. But I don't believe that we have to choose parties or protest. I don't believe we have to choose activism or education. I believe we get to be all things. That doesn't mean we don't make sacrifice. Having your cake and eating it too doesn't mean you don't share the cake. Doesn't mean you get to eat the whole thing. Doesn't mean that you don't make sacrifices for eating that cake. Maybe it's your weight. But it means that we get to have our cake and eat it too. And so I'm trying to spread a message, right, that I get to be at 20 years old an activist and an entrepreneur and a speaker and a student and what? We get to be what we want to be. And who's going to tell us different? Right? Our truth is our truth. And we walk in our power. And we walk in that truth. You know, when I'm here with Viacom and Generation Change, and I'm here with a bunch of young people, right, who are doing the damn thing right now. Because our time isn't later, it has to be now. And so as I look around this room, right, and as I look around the world, what I want so badly is two things. One is that if you ask me the one thing that I wish that we could change about the world, is that I think so often, so much of the strife that exists is because people operate from a mindset that if I don't see it, it doesn't exist. You know, if I don't see white privilege, it doesn't exist. No, because you don't see white privilege means it exists. And I think so often we allow our own experience and our own perspective to be the law and the rule instead of the exception. And that needs to change. Who am I to tell a young woman of color what her experience is? Who am I to tell a refugee about what their lived experience is? Who am I to tell somebody else about their truth? And I hope, and I pray that Generation Z is the generation to disrupt this paradigm, to say, no, I am never the expert on something I don't know about, on something I don't experience. I believe the oppressed are always the experts on their oppression. I believe that the person experiencing that reality is always the expert on that reality. And so that paradigm needs to fundamentally shift. So what I encourage you all to do is follow folks who look nothing like you online. Follow folks whose stories make you uncomfortable, make you ask hard questions. Follow me and at me, right? Call me out, at Ziad the activist, I won't be mad. And additionally, what I really hope y'all do is pick one thing. Look around the world right now and pick one thing that you want to change about the world. Maybe it's the dress code at your school. Maybe it's that your history class has never taught your stories or your realities. Whatever it might be, choose one thing and take one step. Take one step forward to do something about that. Something that makes you feel like you're taking a step forward, because when I started, I had no idea I'd end up here right now. But I took that first step, had no idea what I was doing, saw a problem in my community and said, I want to do something about it. So I created a website, created some social media handles, and somehow ended up here, somehow ended up starting a company, somehow ended up being a progressive advocate, whatever you want to call me. But here I am, and here we all are. And somehow we got here, so take that step. Pick one thing, whatever came into your mind first when I said that prompt, and do that thing. We all have something that makes our eyes light up when we talk about it, makes our stomach ignite when we think about it. So let's do that thing more. So many people ask me, you know, what's your advice in public speaking? My advice is don't. I don't speak and didn't get better at speaking because I trained in speaking. When you try to convince your mom to let you go out to that party, you become your most confident self because you believe what you're saying. Believe what you're saying. Have belief in your truth, and if you want to convince the person you're talking to enough, the rest follows. I believe what I'm saying, and so it comes through, I hope. I pray. But I believe that we all have that same power and capacity to do that same thing. It's just a matter of wanting to convince that person so much that your whole body gets into it. Because there's too much at stake, and I don't have to tell you that right now, being a young person is hard, uncomfortable, difficult. And it comes with stresses and pressures that I can only begin to articulate. But I believe that we have the power to not choose between different realities, but to claim them all. And to say confidently and proudly that we're not the leaders of tomorrow. We're the leaders of today. We're the leaders of right now. People need to stop telling me you're gonna be somebody someday. No, I'm somebody right now. We are somebody right now. And so the question becomes, to the adults in the room, if we are the leaders of tomorrow, if we're not the leaders of tomorrow, instead we're the leaders of today, are you gonna wait until tomorrow to talk to us? And I don't mean as guinea pigs, I mean as partners. Thank you.
Still a little lost in that cake metaphor. Just to be clear, am I getting the cake? I'll visit the wellness area afterward. What Ziad saying resonates so much with me as somebody who, it's tricky because we talked about not telling other people's stories. And in the work that I do, I constantly find myself advocating and doing activist work for young people. And the thing about that is I did used to be a young person. So how do we transition into creating space? The first TEDx talk that I did was to several thousand young people, and I felt this extreme irony. Like, how do I stand up here? And much like Lindsay was questioning, what is the place that I now have? To Ziad's point and to the credit of the YMCA and this movement that we've created, we are now able to say, all right, Tonio, let's sit over here and invite young people not to be props, but to do the damn thing. Right.
But you're still a young person.
Oh, thanks. Thanks. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep. I think before we go to our next speaker, we have a video to show.
Yes, we do.
Home. It means such completely different things to every person in the world. It's a house, it's a city, it's a country. Home is something you want to protect. People will go to extraordinary lengths to preserve their home. People love their homes. And if they don't feel that they have a home, they'll risk everything to find one. The further we find ourselves from home, the more we miss it. It's a question of perspective, of distance. And pretty much every single person who's been to space over the last 50 years has come to the same conclusion. It's the whole planet that's our home.
The Earth was small, light, blue, and so touchingly alone. Our home that must be defended like a holy relic.
When you're finally up at the moon, looking back on Earth, all those differences and nationalistic traits are pretty well going to blend, and you're going to get a concept that maybe this is one world. And why the hell can't we learn to live together like decent people?
On the first day up in space, we all pointed to our own countries. The third or fourth day, we were pointing to our continents. By the fifth day, we were aware of only one Earth.
We have this connection to Earth. I mean, it's our home.
Wherever we live, whatever language we speak or food we eat, the Earth is our home. We have to take care of it. And we should look out for everyone else who lives here. That has got to be our goal. That's why we need the goals.
I am a sucker for conversations about homes, those we come from, those we build together, and those it is our responsibility to care for. And I couldn't be more honored to introduce our final speaker for the morning, who not only has devoted his life to caring for this earth that we call home through his work at Greenpeace, he also is devoted to this home that we have created here together with the YMCA. This is his second time appearing at a Global Y conference. He spoke in Mexico, and he left the Amnesty International General Assembly just maybe yesterday or the day before, depending on where you start counting the time zones, to be here with us because he believes in the mission of the YMCA. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the General Secretary of Amnesty International, Kumi Naidoo.
Thanks. Friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I must confess that I'm feeling a little bit nervous. So let me just say, there's a tradition in South Africa that I learned as a young person. When you followed 4 brilliant speeches like what you've heard, you started by saying, most of the really good points I wanted to make have been eloquently made by the previous speakers. And then you said, however, for emphasis, and then you spoke for about 2 hours. But the other reason I'm nervous is that I didn't get trained by TED to do the talk. That's why I got a lectern with some notes. But I seriously am more and more nervous these days. And let me tell you in a story. So I was speaking in the United States some time ago, and I was just recounting the state of the world that we are in. And at the end of my speech, a very unhappy person put up a hand and said, Dr. Naidoo, have you heard of Martin Luther King? And I said, yes. He inspired me as a young person. And he said, do you know what his most famous speech was called? Anybody? So thinking it was a trick question, I said it very gently. I said, I have a dream. And she shouted back at me. She said, yes. It was I have a dream, but when I hear you speak, it sounds like you have a nightmare. Everything is getting worse and worse. Therein lies the challenge of leadership for all of us. How do we speak the truth? How do we not sanitize the fact that humanity is in a very, very dire situation right now on the one hand, but how do we do it in a way that motivates, inspires, and encourages people to stand up and resist the injustices that we see in our world? The moment of history that we have been living in has been called a boiling point, a perfect storm, and a philosopher friend of mine describes the moment that we are in as a moment of global moral panic. And the 4 trends that he talks about is rising inequality, the fact that today the wealth of our planet is so unequally distributed that some people consume so much and the overwhelming majority have so little. And unless we address this question, as the Sustainable Development Goals is seeking to do, to bridge inequality, we don't have a chance to deliver to our children and their children a more peaceful, a more just, and a more equitable future. The second trend is what you could call rising authoritarian power. We are seeing in many countries in the world, including in countries where we didn't expect to have these problems, more and more leaders coming into power, using division, using hate, using disunity as a basis to actually win power. We're not just talking about Trump in the United States or Bolsonaro in Brazil or the Saudi Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia. We're talking about Boris Johnson. Yes, somebody's counted Boris, so I had to acknowledge that. And basically what is worrying is that it seems like all of them are on the same WhatsApp list, sharing strategies about how to disunite people, how to use repression. And apparently the Saudi Crown Prince is a moderator of that WhatsApp group. The very same Saudi Crown Prince that led the action of murdering in the most brutal way journalist Jamal Khashoggi in Turkey last year, and all the powerful nations in the world have stood by. 1 year almost is gone and no accountability for one of the most brutal acts of human rights violations. So this trend towards authoritarian power should worry us all. Just because we have elections in countries doesn't mean we necessarily have democracy. The third trend is xenophobia. And today xenophobia is playing out differently. It's connected across boundaries. Recently I was in Australia. I discovered that Steve Bannon was just there. A couple months ago I was in France. Steve Bannon was there. But let me tell you something. I have a big agreement with Steve Bannon that will shock you. Steve Bannon is right about one thing. Culture leads political life. Political life does not lead culture. And we who are trying to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, who are trying to promote human rights and so on, must recognize the importance and power of culture. People change societies through music, through arts, through culture. And we, sometimes who are trying to address those issues, tend to be too intellectual, too jargony, too long documents, and so on. We need to start speaking in ways that brings into the conversation millions of people who need to be at the table, but who are spectators of their own destinies. The fourth challenge is the existential one, and that is the reality of climate change. Now, there is good news. You probably heard people like myself say, save the planet, save the climate, save the environment. The good news is the planet is just fine. The planet does not need any saving. Because if we continue on the path that we're on, we warm up the planet to a point where we deplete our water resources, we destroy our soil, the planet heats up, we're not able to grow food, and what is the end result? We will be gone, the planet will still be here. The good news is, once we become extinct as a species, the forests will recover, the oceans will replenish, and all of that. So let's understand that the struggle to avert catastrophic climate change is nothing more or nothing less about protecting our children and their children's futures. So to those few leaders in the world today that still continue to deny that climate change is real and it's happening and it's already taking lives, we say to them, wake up, smell the coffee, and start recognizing the science. We believe the science. We believe the science when the science says we should wear seat belts. Right? The laws are passed, we have to wear seat belts, we get fined. Nobody challenges that. When the science tells us safe sex equals using condoms, generally we don't contest it. But when the science is telling us, as it did in October last year, that we have 12 years, let me say that again. Actually, I shouldn't say 12 years, because it's now 11 years by 2030 to get emissions to peak and start coming down at least by 50% reduction by 2010 levels. We should all be shaking in our boots. Sorry, I don't have boots, but. And what has happened? There were 2 days in the media around it, and then it has been business as usual. For Amnesty International, I'm just coming from our conference in Africa, our global conference, where we have said very, very clear, climate change is one of the biggest challenges facing humanity because it threatens the very possibility of humanity to exist on this planet. And we say to our politicians, they must now realize that we are on a very scary suicidal trajectory. They need to recognize that nature does not negotiate. We cannot change the science. We can only change political will. And to change that political will, I believe there is no more powerful force than the voice and activism of young people that we have been seeing all around the world over the last couple of years. So when Greta Thunberg from Sweden with millions and millions of young children, and I feel ashamed. I really feel ashamed, honestly, that young people have to go out on Fridays in many countries around the world to force the leaders to change. I got involved as a young activist when I was 15. Right? You know, in my first march, we were fighting against the inequality in education under the apartheid system. And I can tell you in my first march, the slogan was, "We want equality, we want equality." By the time the slogan got to the younger kids at the back, they were chanting, "We want a color TV, we want a color TV." Because they thought that was the slogan in the front. The truth is, kids in white schools had color TVs, kids in black schools had no TVs. And if I'm brutally honest with you, at that time in my life, I wanted a color TV and equality almost equally. But the thing, what young people have done is they've brought freshness, they've brought urgency, they've brought passion. For example, I had the chance to march with the young people here in London, and I can tell you their slogans are amongst the best I've heard. So as we march past Downing Street, you know, where the cabinet meets, two young girls, maybe 13, 14 years old, picked up a banner saying, "You can get better cabinets at IKEA." A few minutes later, two 14-year-olds picked up a sign saying, "Keep Earth clean, it's not Uranus." I tried that joke in Germany, it didn't work, it got lost in translation. So, young people are critical, and what are young people saying to us? If you read what these young people are saying, it's not only about climate. They are saying that humanity has to change the way we think about how we live on this planet. Right? They are saying we need to break the divisions between rich and poor. We need to break the divisions between north, south, east, west, because one of the things that climate change offers to us is an opportunity. We have lived in a world far too long where we've been divided by north, south, developing, rich and poor. We have to come to the realization urgently right now. We either get it right as rich and poor countries working together and we secure the future of hopefully the majority of our children, or if we continue to pull back and not act with the urgency that young people are saying we must act legitimately, in the end, climate change won't recognize any boundaries, and rich countries and poor countries, and even within countries, rich people and poor people will both be impacted. It is true that rich people will have more opportunities to maybe escape in the 4x4s when Hurricane Katrina hits New Orleans, for example, as we saw. But ultimately, we have to recognize that we have to look at climate change as an opportunity for us to build the kind of humanity that YMCA has been promoting for so many years. So Martin Luther King, speaking in the 1960s, said, "My friends, as I come to the end of my speech, I want to note that in the field of modern child psychology, there's a very dominant term called maladjusted." Now, all of us want to live a well-adjusted life and not suffer from schizophrenia or other mental illnesses. But my friends, I say to you, by the way, this is all Martin Luther King. They're much too eloquent to be me. So he says, "But my friends, as I come to the end of my speech, I want to say that there are certain things in our world that are so immoral and unjust that good, decent people should refuse to adjust to." He went on to say, "I never intend to adjust myself to religious bigotry. I never intend to adjust myself to racial discrimination. I never intend to adjust myself to the mindless expenditure on military weapons when people don't have food to eat. And importantly, on the economy," he said, "I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few when millions of God's children are smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in an affluent society." He was talking about the United States in the mid-60s. That wisdom is 1,000 times more applicable in the United States as it is to virtually every country around the world. And in a longer version of the speech, he says, "I now call upon decent women and men around the world to come together to set up a new international association to be known as the International Association for the Advancement of Creative Maladjustment." And it is young people around the world today who are creatively maladjusting. When I heard the speakers, our first colleague from Canada, standing up and saying, I refuse to be divided from the people whose lands these originally were. I'm willing to take a sense of responsibility of the history of injustice that indigenous peoples around the world have faced and continue to face. And that is the kind of morality and moral leadership that we need, and they are coming from young people. I should also say that my generation have run out of fresh ideas. And we must be willing to acknowledge that, right? And I look to young people for the freshness of the perspective, the freshness of the lenses, as some people say, to bring new ideas about how we turn this world around. And some of the things young people are noting, for example, that the biggest disease in the world today is not Ebola or HIV/AIDS or influenza. The biggest disease in the world today is a disease we could call affluenza. We're far, you know the word affluent, which means very wealthy, right? Where far too many people are suffering from a pathological illness where they believe that a good, meaningful, decent life comes from more and more consumption, more and more personal material accumulation and so on, rather than what YMCA has been doing for 175 years, which is promoting a sense of community, a sense of community participation, creating opportunities for young people to be off the streets and in meaningful activity. And that's the kind of societies we need to be celebrating. It has been in the DNA of the YMCA to promote this kind of public participation. And by the way, some of you might not know this. You know, we talk about civil society organizations and the importance of civil society organizations. By the way, one of the largest civil society organizations in the world, one of the most effective civil society organizations in the world, one of the civil society organizations that has the presence in most countries around the world is the YMCA, and all of you should be proud to be part of this movement. And I have thankfully been a beneficiary of the YMCA through staying in some of your facilities, because they're much cheaper and much nicer than staying in a hotel, and having participated in many of your activities. And as Secretary General of Civicus, YMCA was a member and a very, very active and valued member. So I want to make an appeal to young people right now. We need to recognize that we are not simply 5 minutes to midnight, we are beyond 5 minutes to midnight in terms of the clock is running out. You know, with gender equality, for example, it's pathetic that after so many years of fighting for gender equality, we are where we are. However, there isn't a clock saying you have to sort out gender equality by a particular moment. Climate change is a clock on the table. We are already seeing lives being lost. We're already seeing devastation. We're already seeing changes in weather patterns that are quite clearly confirming what the scientists have told us for so long, and we need to create space for young people's creativity to help sort out the problem. So for example, in Zambia, a couple of years ago, 4 young girls between the ages of 13 and 15 for the science project designed a generator that can give you 5 hours of electricity run on 1 liter of human urine. If that didn't quite translate, everybody got urine? You're either urine or you're out, huh? You got it? And by the way, I've been saying to African leaders recently, I had a chance to address the African Union, because, you know, in Bristol, in Uppsala, in Sweden, in a couple of European cities, they run their buses on human feces, right? Feces, poo, shit, crap, whatever. So I've been saying to African leaders, I refuse to accept that European shit is better than African shit. We have to get our shit together and turn the crisis of climate change into an opportunity. But in doing this, we have to celebrate our humanity. And for me, that's one of the things I find so impressive of YWCA. It is a movement that has celebrated our intrinsic goodness as human beings. And I want to say that one of the things that saddens me is how we have been treating our brothers and sisters who have been forced to become refugees or migrants. We have behaved with insensitivity and inhumanity in the main. And we have violated international laws that govern refugees. So, we've had ridiculous situations happen in the last couple of years. In Italy, one mayor who was trying to do more to help refugees in Italy was accused of aggressive solidarity. Is there such a thing? Aggressive solidarity. In the United States, Scott Warren and 3 other people who are part of an NGO called No More Deaths, who have been putting water and small amounts of food in the desert so that people don't starve to death, is facing 20 years in prison. 20 years in prison for showing humanity and showing solidarity. And in Greece. And now I want to invite you to help me with something, and if you help me, then I'm going to sing a song to close my speech, okay? So let me tell you a story about 2 people from the Greek refugee crisis. Sarah Mandini and Sean Binder. They are activists and are trained rescuers. They gave the time and professional skills to volunteer on the Greek island of Lesbos, searching for boats in distress and helping refugees on board. What brought them together were their shared values of solidarity, their fight for justice, and their own refugee background. Sean's father was a refugee from Vietnam. Sarah is herself a refugee from Syria who crossed the Aegean Sea in an inflatable boat herself in 2015. When the engine failed, she and her sister, Yusra, now an Olympic swimmer by the way, jumped into the water and towed the boat ashore, saving everybody on board. Why do they need your help? Sarah and Sean were arrested in Greece in August 2018 and jailed for more than 100 days before being bailed. But why, you ask? They were volunteering with an NGO helping people in need. Well, instead of praise, they are accused of people smuggling, spying, and belonging to a criminal organization and could face up to 25 years in jail. These charges are absurd. Instead of celebrating humanity in action, this government is criminalizing solidarity with refugees in a pattern, sadly, that we are seeing across Europe and in many other wealthy countries in the world, including Australia, US, and elsewhere. This is about the kind of world we want to live in. Solidarity is in the DNA of the YMCA. Decency and compassion is in the DNA of the YMCA, Amnesty International, and many other organizations. And this is what Sean told Amnesty, and I quote, "What's scary is not that it has put me in jail without trial, or that I still face 25 years in prison, it's that it can happen to anyone." And importantly, he said, and I quote, "Humanitarian work isn't criminal, but importantly, he says, nor is it heroic. Helping others should be absolutely normal." So today I want to invite you to help me to send a powerful message to all our leaders, to appeal to them to show more compassion for people who are refugees, who are escaping horrific situations in different parts of the world, a problem or a trend that is likely to continue given that climate impacts are going to create more and more climate refugees. And the message that I want to send, and I invite you to help me and join me, is a simple message to the Greek authorities. They have the power to send a message that they want to change, and we are simply asking them to drop the charges against these 2 brave young activists. So, is that okay that I will turn the camera to you, and at some point I'll read the story, and I would like you to join me in saying, drop the charges, okay? Everybody's cool? Okay, the cameraman, he's got one fancy gadget, he's gonna turn it around, so it should be okay. So I have to record this, and then what I'd like you to do is if each of us can put it on Instagram and Twitter and so on, hopefully we can all feel proud, because we believe this is a victory we are about to win, and if we all participate, I think it will just give us that push, and we will get some positive action for these two young, brave people. Okay, so I'm recording the script now. Sorry, I'm not very good with technology. You know, I'm a digital, I was told by my daughter, Dad, you're a digital immigrant, and I'm a digital native. I'm Kumi Naidoo, the Secretary General of Amnesty International, and I'm here at the special YMCA 175th anniversary event in London. Today, we salute Sarah Madini and Sean Binder, two brave young activists and rescuers facing jail in Greece, just for saving the lives of refugees and migrants. Sarah, Sean, we will fight with you until these absurd charges are dropped. Humanitarian work should be applauded, not criminalized. Me and my friends here at the YMCA and the YWCA have a message for the Greek authorities. And the message is, drop the charges. One more time, drop the charges. Thank you very much. In conclusion, I would like to invite you all to rise to the call that the young people have made to make the week of 20th to 27th September the biggest climate mobilization ever, so that we can get our leaders to act with urgency. There is a global strike call for the 20th of September, and I urge you to do whatever peaceful actions you can to join and support that, so our leaders know that we are serious about securing our children and their children's future. I want to end with a story that is a bit sad, but don't focus on the sad part, focus on the inspirational stuff. When I was 22 years old, I was fleeing South Africa into exile. And my best friend at that time, a guy called Lenny, asked me this question. He said, Kumi, what is the biggest contribution any one of us can make to the cause of humanity? And I said, that's a very easy question. It's giving your life. And he said, you mean participating in a demonstration, getting shot and killed, and becoming a martyr? Now that was happening in South Africa on a weekly basis at that time. So I said, yes. And he said, no, that's not the right answer. It's not giving your life, but giving the rest of your life. To be honest, I was 22 years old at that time. My friend Lenny was way ahead of us. You know, he was the only one who understood the intersection between economic justice and environmental justice and so on. And in fact, at that time, I jokingly say he was probably one of only like 5,000 voluntary vegetarians on the entire African continent. So anyway, we hugged each other, shed some tears, flee in different directions. And a few years later, 2 years later, I get the message that my friend Lenny and 4 young women from my home city were brutally murdered by the apartheid regime. There were so many bullets in their bodies, the parents couldn't even recognize them. And obviously, I had to think deep and hard when I got the news that Lenny had been murdered. What he was saying is, the struggle for justice, social justice, economic justice, climate justice, justice for refugees, justice for indigenous peoples, all these struggles are marathons and they're not sprints. And the biggest contribution that any one of us can give is to have the passion, the stamina, the perseverance to continue to push and push and push until those struggles are achieved. And YMCA, on its 175th anniversary, has shown that longevity, that stamina, and that perseverance that all organizations around the world can be inspired by. So I want to end. I promised you that if you did the drop the charges with me, I was going to sing a little song. So I just want to say, how many of you, I have a quick question for you, how many of you know where your ancestors come from? And I want you to go as far back as possible. Okay, anybody knows where your ancestors come from? As far back as possible. Yes? Germany. Okay, go a little bit further back now. Okay? As far back. Guangdong, China. Guangdong, okay, good. I'm not getting the answer yet that I want. Okay, why are those white people there saying they come from Africa? So somebody shouted Africa there, please tell me. Okay. Okay, so great. Did you all hear that? It's beyond reasonable doubt that humanity started on the African continent, and as the continent shifted apart, people moved, and folks worked their way back to Europe, and I'm sorry that in that process some of you lost some color along the way. Sorry about that. So we know that beyond any reasonable doubt, scientifically, that humanity started in Africa. So I want to conclude with a song with only has 2 words in it. Pambili, Africa, which means forward with Africa. But given that all of us have our roots in Africa, it's forward with humanity, okay? Ish, I need some water. I'm finishing now. Okay, so let me try. Pambili, 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 Africa. Pambili, 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 Africa. Okay, it's easy, right? All of us now. Pambili, 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 Africa. Pambili, 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 Africa. Okay, one last time. Pambili, 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 Africa. Pambili, 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 Africa. Muchas gracias, merci beaucoup, shukran, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A few very important announcements before you all head off. That brings to a close our TED Ed plenary sessions. And I want to just note a few things. One, I think it's important to note that during Kumi's talk, we all applauded the end of the human race. I don't know if you all remember that. It's a powerful speaker that can get us to applaud that. Also, if you noticed, he and John come from the same wardrobe, low-key dressing mentality, I think. I want to call something out that I think is really important as we close today. Many of you all are probably thinking to yourselves, maybe you're inspired by some of the speakers you heard and thinking, oh, I wasn't having dinner with President Obama when I was 16. What power do I have? You do not have to be a main stage speaker to have an impact on your community and on the world. You have to share your ideas. And you have to do exactly what you've been doing in your homes and your communities, creating space for other people to share theirs. So thank you all so much for listening, and please take this home with you, take it forward by continuing to develop and share your own ideas. Lunch coming up soon?
Yep, you know the logistics. Thank you so much. It was lovely meeting you all, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you.
There is